I brought buns to the school bully for 3 months. Because he always said he was so poor he couldn't even afford to eat. But later, I saw with my own eyes him getting into a Rolls-Royce. The impeccably dressed butler respectfully called him young master. I angrily confronted him. So you've been pretending to be poor to scam buns from me? He gritted his teeth. Do you think I bloody need to scam your buns? Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Arthur Webb was the poorest school bully I'd ever seen. His uniform was washed to a pale shade, his backpack faded and worn, and his trainers had several holes in them. He was poor to an alarming degree. I first saw him in the school canteen. At 12:15 p.m., the queue for counter number 3 was the longest. I was counting the last 35.5 pounds on my meal card when a loud crash came from behind me. As I turned, I saw a boy in the middle of the queue trembling and apologizing to another lad. I recognized the boy as Connor Ellington, a troublemaker known for cutting queues. Nobody usually dared to confront him. Now his tray had been knocked over, and he was covered in soup. It seemed he'd met someone even tougher than himself. The boy facing him was tall. His faded uniform hung loosely on his frame, the sleeve revealing a glimpse of a dark blue tattoo. A meatball rolled by his foot, which he carelessly crushed with his toe. Next time, queue up properly, he said. Those 5 words, though softly spoken, seemed to grant Connor a reprieve. Nodding frantically, he turned and fled the hall. Who's that? I whispered to the student beside me. They widened their eyes in surprise. You don't know Arthur Webb? He's our school's top bully. I've heard he's brutal in fights, and quite fierce. But, apparently he doesn't pick on ordinary students, just targets the school bullies. Arthur collected his food and walked alone to a corner of the canteen. His tray held only a bowl of plain rice and a small dish of pickles. He looked rather poor. I observed him for 3 days. Each time, I saw him sitting under the abandoned basketball hoop, munching on a bun. The sunlight stretched his shadow long, his collarbones jutting out from his uniform collar. Even his wrists looked pale with malnutrition. On the 4th day at lunch, I asked for 2 extra buns when getting my food. I offered one to him at the basketball court. Want one? I asked. Arthur looked up. His dark eyes gazed directly into mine. His eyelids drooped slightly at the corners, his lashes casting a small shadow in the sunlight. He was unexpectedly handsome. Why? He asked in a low voice, with a hint of wariness. I tightened my grip on the bun. I bought too many, can't finish them all. I have a younger brother. When I was 5, our father passed away and our mother remarried. My brother and I went to live with our grandmother. Granny Edith had bad legs and couldn't work. Jeremy and I often went hungry, barely surviving on the charity of our neighbors. Jeremy was so thin that I could feel his bones whenever I held him, which pained my hands. When he was 3, he came down with a high fever. As I carried him to the clinic, he pulled out half a bun from his pocket and tried to give it to me. You eat it, sis. I'm not hungry, he said. Later, a volunteer teacher came to our village and helped us apply for government assistance. Our lives improved a bit after that. But Jeremy didn't make it through that winter. He slipped on some ice, and with his long-term malnutrition, he passed away before we could get him to the hospital. I blinked back the tears that threatened to fall, forcing the painful memories away. Arthur reminds me so much of Jeremy. The next day at noon, Arthur was sitting under the same basketball hoop as yesterday. He looked up slightly as I approached. What's your excuse today? I handed him the bun, keeping a straight face. The cafeteria had a sale. He chuckled but took the bun anyway. Thank you, he said softly. After hesitating for a moment, I asked, Are you very poor? He nodded, can barely afford to eat. Having experienced such hardship myself, I felt a sense of kinship that made me sympathize with him. I decided then to bring him more food in the future. As we spent more time together, I discovered that Arthur was a calm, modest, and low-key person. To be honest, he didn't seem to fit the image of a school bully at all. The September afternoon sun was still scorching, heating up the iron railings along the corridor. As I emerged from the office carrying a stack of homework books, Someone blocked my path. Well, if it isn't the school bully's little sidekick? I froze, knowing without looking up that it was Connor. Ever since the canteen incident, he'd been looking at me with venom in his eyes. Probably because I'd been hanging around Arthur. I pretended not to hear and tried to walk around him. He gave me a not-so-gentle shove. I hear you've been bringing lunch to Arthur every day? He opened his school blazer, revealing the designer t-shirt underneath. What's this? Poor birds of a feather flock together? His two cronies let out grating laughs. I frowned. Move. I need to get back to class. Connor's brow furrowed, clearly not expecting this reaction from me. The next second, he reached out and knocked the homework books from my hands. Crash! Dozens of books scattered across the floor like flower petals. Some sliding far away, their covers getting dusty. Oops, butterfingers, Connor grinned, showing his crooked teeth. I crouched down. The students in the corridor had retreated, forming an eerie vacuum around us. My fingertips had barely touched the first book when a dirty trainer stepped on it. I didn't say use your hands. Use your mouth, he said in a provocative tone. I gritted my teeth, about to push his foot away, when a commotion broke out at the end of the corridor. The crowd parted automatically. Arthur stood there. He wasn't wearing his school blazer today, just a well-worn black t-shirt. The shadow at his collarbone deep enough to hold sunlight. His dark eyes were unreadable, devoid of any emotion. Pick them up, he said. 3 words, as light as a feather falling. Yet they made Connor's foot retract as if electrocuted. Arthur, mate, I was just joking around. Connor's Adam's apple bobbed up and down. Arthur slowly walked over. The sound of his trainer scraping against the floor particularly jarring in the dead silence of the corridor. He stopped in front of the scattered books. His gaze sweeping over me before settling back on Connor. No hands, he said, enunciating each word. Use your mouth. Connor's fists clenched and unclenched. Then clenched again before he resigned himself to his fate. He knelt on the ground and started picking up the books with his mouth. His 2 cronies tried to help but were pinned in place by a single look from Arthur. The books were quickly gathered. Apologize, Arthur commanded coldly. Sorry. After uttering these words, Connor turned and ran off at lightning speed. As I took the books back, I noticed Arthur's right hand was clenched into a fist. Fresh scrapes visible on his knuckles. I suddenly remembered hearing about a fight in year 13 yesterday. Now I had a pretty good idea who was involved. As soon as Connor left, the crowd dispersed. Arthur glanced at me. Weren't you quite bossy with me? I knew he was referring to the time. I forcefully shoved 2 pieces of roast beef into his mouth when he refused to eat. This bloke really holds a grudge. He reached out and lightly smacked the back of my head. Forget it. If anyone bullies you again, come find me. With that, he turned and left. I stood there, holding the crumpled homework books. The scent of Arthur's passing still lingering in my nose. A mix of cheap soap and some unidentifiable herbal smell. It wasn't until the bell rang that I realized my palms were sweaty. The book on top of the stack was Arthur's. The words Year 13 Class 2 Arthur Webb written on the cover. With such force it had nearly torn through the paper. The last stroke was drawn out long, like an unsheathed sword. I brought him buns for 3 months. That morning, I woke up early to prepare 2 packed lunches. One for myself and one for Arthur. Inside, I placed some roast beef, fried eggs, and a couple of vegetable slices. Is it Christmas already? Arthur teased as he accepted the lunch box. I gave him a playful kick. It's to celebrate you making it into the top 10 in our year. He dodged my foot, letting out a soft snort before obediently opening the lunch box and popping a piece of roast beef into his mouth. Is it good? I asked nervously. It's all right, he said, then proceeded to devour his portion and snatch 2 pieces of meat from my box. I made a show of trying to hit him, but he caught my fist midair. Arthur gripped my wrist, and that small patch of skin instantly felt scalding hot. Trying to ambush me? He raised an eyebrow with a smile, his voice low and tinged with lazy amusement. My ears burned instantly, and I practically fled, pushing him away as I stood up. I ran away as fast as I could. After the evening study session, a heavy rainstorm hit unexpectedly. I was hugging a paper bag full of buns and rushing into the rain when I spotted Arthur standing under a large tree by the school gates. He had draped his school jacket over a stray cat, leaving himself in just a thin white t-shirt. Arthur. I was about to call out to him when a car approached from the distance. A black sedan silently glided to a stop in front of him. An elderly man in a suit got out of the car. He bowed respectfully and opened the car door for Arthur. I was too far away to hear clearly, but I caught the old man addressing Arthur as young master. Arthur nodded slightly and got into the car, accepting his backpack from the elderly man. I had seen that brand of bag online before. It was called Louis Vuitton, a luxury item. Raindrops shattered into 8 petals as they hit the Rolls-Royce emblem. I slowly curled my fingers inward. It felt like someone had viciously squeezed my heart. A sour feeling rose from my throat, making it painful to breathe. 3 months of buns, his claims about not having money for food. The breakfast money I had scrimped and saved. At that moment, it all became a joke. The cold rain seeped into my school uniform collar. As I turned to leave, I saw the car window rolling down. Through the curtain of rain, our gazes collided in midair. His pupils suddenly constricted, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he just furrowed his brow. The Rolls-Royce's window slowly rolled up, and Arthur's face disappeared behind the dark glass. The car silently slid into the rain, its taillights leaving 2 long red streaks in the puddles. Liar, I heard my own voice, hoarse and tight. I didn't go to school the next day. My fever spiked to 39 degrees Celsius. And I felt like I had been stuffed into an oven and then thrown into an ice cellar. Granny Edith placed a damp cloth on my forehead, sighing. "Child, don't you know to take shelter when it rains?" I closed my eyes, my mind filled with the image of Arthur sitting in that luxury car. The way he accepted the backpack was so natural, as if that had always been his life. On the 3rd day, after my fever broke, I went back to school as usual. "Esther!" The familiar voice made me freeze. Arthur was leaning against the classroom door. Dark circles under his eyes indicating he hadn't slept well either. He was still wearing that faded school uniform, once again looking like the poor student I thought I knew. "Let's talk," he said, blocking my path. "There's nothing to talk about, young Master Webb." I emphasized the last 3 words, trying to squeeze past him. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you played me for a fool. Was it fun watching me save my breakfast money every day like an idiot to buy you meat?" My voice shook. "Do you know that for 3 months straight, I haven't had a decent lunch because of that bit of money?" Arthur's grip loosened slightly. I took the chance to pull my hand away and rushed into the classroom without looking back. Throughout the morning, I could feel his scorching gaze on the back of my head. Arthur's stare felt like a branding iron, but I didn't turn around. As soon as the bell rang, I was the first to dash out of the classroom, heading straight for the cafeteria. At counter number 3, I mechanically queued to get my food. Suddenly, a mocking voice came from behind me. Well, has the little sidekick been dumped?" It was Connor again. He approached with 2 of his cronies, malicious smiles plastered on their faces. I gripped my tray tightly. "None of your business." He snatched my meal card. "Since you're so fond of treating others, why don't you treat us 3 to a nice meal today?" He was used to extravagant meals. For 3 people, it would cost me a year's worth of meal allowance. I tried to grab it back, but he seized my wrist. "Today, you'll treat us whether you like it or..." His words were cut short. A slender hand gripped the back of his neck from behind, with enough force to make Connor's face turn red instantly. "Didn't I tell you?" Arthur's voice was cold as ice, "not to bother her?" The cafeteria fell silent. Connor's cronies shrank back like mice spotting a cat, not daring to move. Arthur easily retrieved my meal card with his other hand, then tossed Connor aside like a piece of rubbish. Connor scrambled to his feet, shot me a vicious glare, and slunk away. "Your card." Arthur handed the meal card back to me, his fingertips trembling almost imperceptibly. I took the card, abandoned the idea of getting food, and turned to leave. Outside the cafeteria, he finally caught up and blocked my path. Esther, I really can explain. I sneered. Explain how you've been pretending to be poor to con me out of my buns? His eyebrow twitched, and he gritted out. Do you think I need your bloody buns? I stood up straight, looking at him coldly. Fine, then explain. I wanted to see what kind of story he could spin. Arthur closed his eyes briefly, his lips pressed into a thin line. In the sunlight, I noticed a fresh scratch on his temple, and his right knuckles were swollen as if he'd just been in a fight. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, My father has violent tendencies. Yesterday, it was Butler Hubert who came to pick me up. He took me to see a psychiatrist. I was slightly taken aback, my memory flashing back to some earlier details. How he always changed clothes with his back to everyone. Never wore short sleeves for PE, and kept his school jacket on even in summer. After my mother died, I rarely went back to that house. And I never used a penny of his money. The money I have, I earned myself by fighting for others. So, Esther, I really am very poor. And I didn't intentionally trick you out of your buns. I remained silent for a long time, somewhat disbelieving. But if it were made up, this excuse seemed rather clumsy. Let me see, I said. Arthur visibly stiffened. What? Your injuries. Let me see them, and I'll believe you. The sounds of people around us seemed to fade away. Arthur's Adam's apple bobbed up and down, and he finally nodded. After school, I followed Arthur to an abandoned sports equipment room behind the school building. The setting sun shone through the dilapidated windows, casting an orange-red glow over everything. Arthur stood with his back to me, slowly removing his school blazer, then his shirt. I gasped. His back was covered in a crisscross of scars. Some faded to white, others still a fresh pink. The most shocking was a scar that stretched from his right shoulder to his left waist. Like a grotesque centipede. Belt buckle, Arthur said calmly, as if discussing the weather. Last month. My fingers began to tremble uncontrollably. What could possibly warrant this? That was his own father. My voice was hoarse. Does your dad do this often? When he's drunk, he replied, pulling his shirt back on and turning to face me. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. After a long silence, he asked cautiously, Are you still angry? My heart felt like it had been gently struck. I turned towards the door. What do you want for dinner tomorrow? I asked without looking back. Roast beef or sweet and sour pork? A relieved chuckle came from behind me. Either is fine. Everything you make is delicious. By the time we left the equipment room, night had fallen. Arthur insisted on walking me home. We didn't talk much on the way. But something new and subtle was growing in the silence. As we neared my house, Arthur suddenly spoke, Esther. Thank you for the bun, his voice was soft. Not just for the food, but for the feeling that someone cares. Under the streetlight, his eyes shone like stars. I suddenly realized that whether poor or rich, Arthur was always the boy who would give his coat to a stray cat on a rainy day. And that mattered more than any identity. After that, he started walking me home every day. Since that day in the equipment room when I saw his scars, we seemed to have reached a delicate balance. He no longer hid his identity, but rarely mentioned it. Every day after I left school, he would appear behind me right on time, silently following 3 steps behind. You don't have to do this. I finally turned around on the 5th evening. I'm not angry anymore. The setting sun stretched his shadow long. Arthur had his hands in his pockets, his school collar slightly open, revealing a small bruise on his collarbone. I know, he kicked a small pebble at his feet. I want to walk you home. Why? Because Connor won't give up easily. He looked up, his eyes dark. And I like seeing the ivy on your windowsill. I clenched my hand. That ivy was my grandmother's pride and joy, placed on a small shelf outside my bedroom window, its tendrils cascading down like a green waterfall. Suit yourself. I turned and continued walking, but couldn't control the smile tugging at my lips. Arthur's footsteps sounded behind me, maintaining a perfect distance, close enough to protect me if danger came. but not so close as to make me feel intruded upon. On Saturday morning, I accompanied my grandmother to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. Granny Edith's arthritis had been a long-standing issue, causing her sleepless nights whenever the weather turned damp and chilly. As we entered the hospital lobby, the head nurse greeted us warmly. "Granny Edith, welcome. Your hospital fees have been settled. You can go straight to the 3rd floor for your examination." I froze on the spot. What hospital fees? Oh. Didn't a young man come yesterday to pay for you? The head nurse checked the records. He prepaid £5,000, said he was Esther's classmate? My fingers tightened around my bag strap. Granny looked at me, puzzled. "Esther, dear, what's this about?" I'll go ask," I said, trying to appear calm as I escorted Granny to the examination room. Before rushing to the payment counter, the staff member at the window confirmed the name. Arthur Webb, right? Tall, slim lad, quite handsome, but with a rather cold expression. It felt as if something had hit me hard in the chest. £5,000 was equivalent to a year's living expenses for Granny and me. Did he say anything? I asked. "Just said to let him pay," the staff member shrugged. I leaned against the wall, my mind in chaos. Why would he do this? Guilt? Sympathy? Or? My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Arthur. "Are you going to the library today?" I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Should I ask about the money directly? Or pretend I didn't know? "Yes," I finally replied, adding, "Thank you." The typing indicator flickered for a long time before he simply responded with an MMM. At the library, Arthur was already waiting in our usual spot. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow on his lowered eyelashes as he bent over his workbook. I pulled out the chair opposite him, and he immediately looked up, a hint of nervousness flashing in his eyes. "My grandmother," I began. He said simultaneously. We both stopped. Arthur glanced up. "You go first," he said, his fingers unconsciously tapping the table. "Thank you for paying my grandmother's medical bills," I said, looking directly into his eyes. "But that's too much money." "I'll pay you back." Arthur's brow furrowed. "No need." "Yes, there is," I insisted. "Esther," he suddenly called me by my full name, his voice low. "That money means nothing to me." I clenched my fists. "So we're just poor people who need charity, is that it?" I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth. Arthur's expression looked as if he'd been punched. "That's not what I meant," he took a deep breath. "I just wanted to make amends." Dappled sunlight played across the table between us. I noticed a fresh cut on the base of his right thumb, as if he'd been nicked by something sharp. "What happened to your hand?" I changed the subject. Arthur instinctively hid his hand under the table. "It's nothing." I grabbed his wrist, forcing it into the light. The cut wasn't deep, but the edges were red and swollen, clearly not properly treated. "Can't you even afford a plaster?" I glared at him. I thought young Mr. Webb was supposed to be rich. "Runaways don't have money," he smirked, but allowed me to take out a plaster from my bag and apply it. "Besides, I don't want to use his money." I paused. Arthur rarely mentioned his father, and whenever he did, his body would tense up involuntarily. "Then the medical fees. They're my own," he said quickly. "My mom left me some money." After applying the plaster, I didn't let go immediately. Arthur's palm was large, with distinct knuckles, but covered in various small scars. Some old, some new. "Your dad." I began hesitantly. "I don't want to talk about him," he yanked his hand back, his voice turning cold. "Are we going to study or not?" The atmosphere instantly chilled. Throughout the afternoon, Arthur was unusually quiet, only offering brief hints when I struggled with a problem. It wasn't until the library's closing bell rang that he suddenly spoke up. "Starting tomorrow, I'm tutoring you in maths." "Why?" Your foundation is too weak. If you want to get into a top university, listen to me," he said as he packed his bag, his tone brooking no argument. 1 hour after school every day, in the equipment room. All right. The next day after school, I went to the equipment room as promised. When I opened the door, the sight before me left me stunned. The once dusty room had been cleaned spotless. 2 desks were pushed together, with several new textbooks and a box of colorful sticky notes on top. Most surprising was the small electric heater in the corner, emitting a soft orange glow. Arthur stood by the window, his expression unclear in the backlight. "You're here? Did you clean this?" I walked closer, noticing 2 cartons of milk and a small cake on the table. "Yes." He handed me a pen. "From today, 1 hour every day. No slacking off." As I took the pen, my fingertips accidentally brushed against his hand. In that instant, Arthur quickly withdrew his hand as if burned, the tips of his ears turning slightly red. The following days seemed to fly by. Arthur turned out to be an unexpectedly good teacher. Patient and meticulous, he always found the best way to explain things to me. I also helped him with his English. My maths grades improved at a visibly rapid pace, even surprising our form tutor. And Arthur, it seemed, gradually relaxed during our time together. He began to smile, to ruffle my hair when I solved a problem correctly, to remember that I liked strawberry-flavored milk, to carefully unscrew the cap before handing me a bottle of water. Until that rainy day. It was a stuffy afternoon. We had just finished tutoring when it started pouring outside. Arthur insisted on walking me home, and we shared an umbrella as we walked along the slippery path. As we turned a corner, a familiar black car was parked quietly by the roadside. Arthur's body instantly tensed, the water droplets from the umbrella's edge changing their falling trajectory, due to his suddenly increased grip. "Young master." The car door opened, and a middle-aged man in a black suit stepped out. "It wasn't the butler from last time. The master sent me to pick you up." I clearly felt Arthur's breathing become rapid. He instinctively shielded me behind him, his voice as cold as ice. "I said I'm not going back. The master said if you continue to associate with this young lady, he will take necessary measures." The man's gaze swept over me, filled with undisguised contempt. Arthur's hand clenched into a fist at his side. "Let him try. Young master, you know the master's methods." The man handed over an envelope. "This is compensation for this young lady. I hope she understands her position." Before I could react, Arthur had already punched the man in the face. The envelope flew out, scattered banknotes getting wet in the rain, sticking to the ground. "Go back and tell him," Arthur's voice trembled with anger. "If he dares to come near Esther again, I'll make him regret it." The man wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, gave me a gloomy look, then turned and left in the car. The rain fell harder. Arthur stood still, his shoulders shaking slightly. I bent down to pick up a soaked banknote, finding a note tucked inside. "Leave my son, or your grandmother's medical aid will be cancelled." "Arthur," I called out softly. He turned around, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this." My heart ached for him. "It's not your fault. It is my fault." He clenched his hands, his whole body shaking. "If I hadn't approached you, he wouldn't have noticed you and your grandmother at all." His eyes were red, looking like an abandoned puppy. As if possessed, I stepped forward and slowly hugged him. Arthur's body stiffened for a moment. Then he gripped my shoulders tightly, so hard I could barely breathe. "I won't let him hurt you," he whispered in my ear, his voice filled with a determination I'd never heard before. "I swear." In the sound of rain, I heard his heart pounding like thunder. After that, he transferred schools. He never came to class again. A week later, our form tutor said he had transferred. All the messages I sent him were like stones sinking into the sea, without any response. After he left, Connor tried to bother me twice. But with A-levels countdown already started, even a troublemaker like him knew to buckle down. He didn't bother me after that. On the day of A-levels, I sat in the exam hall, listening to the incessant cicada chirping outside. Suddenly, I remembered a day when Arthur and I were doing exercises in the library. He asked me, "Which university do you want to apply to?" I thought for a long time, Southampton. "What about you?" He raised an eyebrow slightly, smiling, "The same." A breeze came through the window, and the young man's fervent gaze fell on my heart. When the results came out, I miraculously got into the top university in our city. Grandma was overjoyed and invited many neighbors who had helped us before to dinner at our house. They all smiled, saying we had finally made it through the hard times. I smiled too, but as I smiled, tears began to fall. After dinner, I was cleaning up the dishes alone. Suddenly, Grandma called me from the yard. "Esther, someone's here for you." I dropped the dishes and ran out, thinking it might be Arthur. But outside was just a courier. He handed me a document. Inside was a bank card and a note. "Study hard at university, Arthur." I clutched the card tightly, my eyes starting to sting uncontrollably. My fingertips gradually turning cold. I understood. From the moment I knew he was the heir to the Webb family, I understood we weren't from the same world. Now he had returned to his world. I should face reality too. I crumpled the note until the writing was blurred by tears. The holiday passed quickly, and a rain at the end of summer washed away the last bit of heat. On the day I left for university, Grandma sat with me at the train station for half the night. She patted the back of my hand, carefully instructing me to eat well, and not to save money for her sake. I listened quietly, my gaze fixed on the entrance. Until the train came, I didn't see him. Grandma asked curiously, "Are you waiting for someone?" I rubbed my reddened eyes. No. The train rumbled in, and rumbled away again. I leaned against the window, tears falling silently. "Arthur, take care of yourself." University life wasn't as dull as high school, but I was so immersed in my studies that it didn't make much difference to me. Except, someone was missing from my side. In the winter of my second year, a news story went viral. Prominent businessman W. under investigation for multiple alleged crimes. My hands trembled so much I could barely hold my phone. Even with the pixelated image, I could recognize the outline of the man being escorted by police. It was unmistakably similar to Arthur. That night, I had a dream. I saw Arthur curled up in a dark corner, his back covered in bloody marks. I tried to reach out and hug him, but no matter how hard I ran, I couldn't get to him. I never expected he would come to find me at my university. After 2 years, he stood beneath a ginkgo tree, its withered yellow leaves falling on his shoulders. He had lost so much weight he was barely recognizable. The dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises, and his right hand unconsciously clenched and unclenched repeatedly. "Arthur?" I called out tentatively. He jerked his head up, his gaze shifting from confusion to focus, finally settling on my face. His lips moved. "Yes, sir." A wave of warmth surged in my eyes. He had once been such a spirited young man. In just 2 years, he seemed to have withered like a fallen leaf. "It's me," I said, taking a step forward and fighting back tears. He retreated a step. "Don't come closer, I'm not quite right." Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, dappling his face. Only then did I notice he was wearing a hearing aid in his left ear. "Your ear." He smashed it. Arthur instinctively touched the hearing aid. 60% hearing loss in my left ear. He struggled to speak. "I just wanted to see you." "Seeing you're well, I should." I wiped away my tears and forcefully grabbed his hand, taking a step forward. His wrist was alarmingly thin, the bones digging painfully into my palm. He tried to pull away once, but I held on tighter, and he stopped resisting. I led him to a small park near the university. On a bench in the late autumn, we sat with an awkward distance between us. "These 2 years," I began. He pressed his lips together, and after a long while, he finally spoke. "I had to leave. If I had stayed by your side, you would have become his target. Only by returning to him and becoming a suitable heir. According to his wishes would he leave you alone. For these 2 years, I've been collecting evidence." Arthur stared at his own hands. His knuckles were white. the bones on the back of his hands so prominent they seemed about to pierce through his skin. My mum left me evidence of his bribery crimes. It took me 2 years to complete the case, but I finally sent him to prison. I said I would make him pay the price. I gently held his trembling hand. His whole body tensed. And these injuries? I asked. Arthur remained silent for a long time before saying, "There's always a price to pay." He kept his head down, his eyelashes casting shadows under his eyes. At that moment, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. The pain was so intense I could barely breathe. A ginkgo leaf slowly fell onto his knee. He stared at the serrated edge of the leaf and said softly, "I tried to kill him once." What? My heart skipped a beat. When I was 14, he beat my mom while drunk. His gaze drifted to the distance. I stabbed him with a fruit knife, but I missed by 2 centimeters. I held my breath. My mom stopped me, and soon after, she had a car accident. His fingers dug into his palm. I was so angry then, angry at myself for being too weak. Angry at why that knife had missed. What I hated most was being his offspring. All my suffering came from him, so. The wind suddenly picked up, swirling the fallen leaves. His voice mixed with the rustling sound. I swore then that I would personally send him to prison. Arthur's phone suddenly started vibrating repeatedly. He glanced at it and tensed up reflexively. I should go back. "I'll come with you," I grabbed his wrist. "No need," he stood up, almost tripping due to the sudden movement. "I'm staying at a rehabilitation center. It's quite boring there. But I want to be with you," I insisted. Arthur was silent for a long time, his voice almost pleading. "Esther, please don't." After a long standoff, I finally gave in. "All right, then I'll visit you on the weekend." After a while, he nodded slightly. On Saturday morning, I arrived at the rehabilitation center with a box of strawberry cake. Arthur was waiting at the entrance. In the sunlight, he looked slightly better than the last time I saw him. Arthur's room was surprisingly cozy. The walls were covered with light blue wallpaper. And on the desk were a few psychology books and a small succulent plant. "It's better than I imagined," I said. Arthur smiled. £5,000 a day, how could it not be? Seeing my surprise, he added, "It's from the trust fund my mom left me. I can finally use it freely now." I opened the cake box. "Try some?" "It's from a new shop behind the university." Arthur picked up a fork, his hand still a bit unsteady. Some cream got on the corner of his mouth. And I instinctively reached out to wipe it off, but he suddenly jerked his head away. My hand froze in midair. He couldn't meet my eyes and just apologized softly. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," I withdrew my hand as if nothing had happened. After that day, I visited him every week. Sometimes I'd bring a book to read to him. Other times we'd just quietly bask in the sun together. His condition fluctuated. Sometimes he could joke and laugh. Other times he'd suddenly fall into a terrifying silence. On a snowy day in December, when I went to see him, the nurse told me Arthur had locked himself in the bathroom since morning. "Arthur," I knocked on the bathroom door. "It's me." The sound of breaking glass came from inside. My heart tightened, and I asked the nurse to open the door. Arthur was curled up in the corner of the shower, his right hand covered in blood. Shattered mirror fragments were on the floor. And on the wall, written in blood, were the crooked words "murderer." "Don't look." He covered my eyes with his uninjured left hand. "Please." I pulled his hand away and hugged him tightly. "You're not." Arthur trembled in my arms like a wounded animal. While the nurse was bandaging him, I noticed several new wounds on his back. "I scratched them myself," he said quietly. I stayed late that day. After Arthur took his medication and fell asleep, the doctor asked to speak with me. "Mr. Webb's condition is more complex than we anticipated. Childhood trauma compounded with the violence he's endured these past 2 years." He sighed. He now trembles at the sight of a belt and vomits at the sound of breaking glass. "We call this PTSD." I clenched the hem of my clothes. "Will he get better?" The doctor pushed up his glasses. "With continuous treatment, it's possible, but not guaranteed." The doctor gave me a deep look. Miss Bell, you're very important to him. On the tube ride back. I stared at the darkness rushing past the window and made a decision. In the days that followed, I practically lived at the rehabilitation center. I held Arthur's hand when he had nightmares, guided his breathing during panic attacks, and coaxed him to eat spoonful by spoonful when he refused food. On Christmas Eve, Arthur suddenly said, "You should go home to be with your grandmother." "What about you?" I asked. "I'll be fine here," he smiled. "The head nurse promised to make pizza for me." I shook my head. "You're coming home with me." Arthur was stunned. "What?" "Gran misses you," I lied. "She keeps asking about the tall boy who used to bring you buns." Arthur's eyes welled up. He turned away, pretending to tidy the bookshelf, but his shoulders were shaking slightly. "I'll frighten her." "No, you won't," I said, turning him to face me. "Besides, we don't have mirrors at home, no belts, and even the glasses are plastic." In the end, Arthur boarded the train home with me. As the train passed through a tunnel, he suddenly grabbed my hand in the darkness. "Esther, if I lose control again, then I'll punch you." I squeezed his fingers. "Just like you did to Connor back then." Arthur laughed. The sunlight streamed back in through the window, falling on his slightly upturned lips. When Gran saw Arthur, she didn't show any signs of unease. She simply touched his gaunt cheeks, muttering, "How did the lad get so thin?" and then piled his plate high with roast beef. Halfway through Christmas dinner, fireworks suddenly erupted outside. Arthur's fork clattered to the floor, his face instantly turning pale. "Arthur's afraid of fireworks?" Gran said kindly. "Esther used to be scared too when she was little. Come here, let Gran cover your ears." Her rough, warm hands covered Arthur's ears, just as they had covered mine years ago. Tears welled up in Arthur's eyes, falling onto Gran's hands. There, don't cry, love," Gran gently patted his back. "This is your home now." At that moment, I saw something slowly melting in Arthur's eyes. When we returned to university after the Christmas break, Arthur's condition had improved significantly. He began to accept systematic exposure therapy, and even tried participating in group activities at the rehab center. The doctor called it a miracle. One day in April, as I was revising in the library, my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a photo from Arthur, standing at the university gates, holding an acceptance letter. "Psychology department?" I rushed downstairs, stopping breathlessly in front of him. "You're going to be my junior now?" Arthur's smile was brighter than the sunshine. "Please take care of me, senior." He extended his hand for a handshake. I hesitated for a moment, then gently hugged him. This was our first complete embrace. Without fear, without trembling, just the sound of two hearts beating. "Thank you," he whispered in my ear. "Thank you for always being by my side." At the graduation ceremony, Arthur took the stage as the outstanding student representative. I sat in the audience, watching the once battered boy now standing confidently in the spotlight. "I used to think darkness was eternal," he said, his gaze piercing through the crowd to find me. "Until someone taught me that stars are also scars, but they still shine. So I found myself, saw the light, and saw hope." After the ceremony, Arthur waited for me at the back door of the hall. He held a small box in his hand, nervously sweating. "It's not a proposal," he rushed to say. "I know it's too early." I opened the box to find a key and a note, "Our home, the one with the ivy." "I bought a small flat," Arthur tilted his head. "The balcony faces south, perfect for plants, if you'd like." I stood on tiptoe, silencing the rest of his words with my lips. He froze for a moment, then relaxed, his arms encircling my waist. In the distance, the early summer breeze swept across the lawn, stirring a wave of green. Those old scars would eventually become the most resilient parts of life. The long night always gives way to dawn. Suffering is the prelude to blossoming.